The bullet shattered the window behind Laura Vance's head, spraying glass across the wooden floorboards as she dove behind her father's old desk, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. 3 months ago, she had been planning her 23rd birthday celebration with her father on this very ranch, laughing about expanding their cattle operation and maybe finally getting that new barn built before winter. Now, her father lay 6 feet under in the Concordia Cemetery, his heart having given out during a late-night ride to check on the herd, and Laura stood alone against men who wanted to strip everything from her like vultures picking at a carcass. The Harrison brothers had started small, offering to buy her out for pennies on the dollar. When she refused, they got creative. Fences cut in the night, cattle driven off her land. Her 2 remaining ranch hands threatened in town until they packed up and left, without even collecting their final pay. Now they were shooting at her own house in broad daylight, and she knew with cold certainty that she was watching her life being taken piece by piece, and there was not a damn thing she could do to stop it. Another shot rang out, this one punching through the door. Laura pressed herself flatter against the floor, tasting dust and fear. She had her father's rifle, but she was one woman against at least 3 men, maybe more. Through the broken window, she could hear them laughing, their voices carrying across the yard. "Come on out, Miss Vance," called Wade Harrison, his voice thick with mock politeness. "We just want to talk business. No need for all this unpleasantness." Business. They called it business when they were stealing her land, her legacy. Everything her father had built over 30 years of hard work and determination. The Vance Ranch sat on some of the best grazing land in all of Smith County, Kansas, with a creek that ran year-round and natural shelter in the rolling hills. Her father had told her once that men would kill for land like this, but she had never truly understood what he meant until she was living it. She grabbed the rifle and checked the ammunition. 6 shots. She had maybe 24 more rounds in the drawer, but what good would that do? She could hold them off for an hour, maybe 2, but eventually they would burn her out, or simply wait until dark and set fire to the whole place. Laura's hands shook as she loaded the weapon, and she hated herself for that weakness. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, had made sure she could handle herself, but he had never taught her how to face down her own death with steady hands. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. More of them? Her chest tightened with despair. But then she heard Wade Harrison curse, sharp and angry. "Who the hell is that?" Laura risked a glance through the window frame, keeping low. A lone rider was approaching from the eastern trail, coming in at a steady pace that suggested neither fear nor hurry. Even from a distance, she could see he sat his horse like he was born to it, and something in the way he carried himself made the Harrison brothers shift their positions, their earlier confidence wavering. The rider drew closer, and Laura could make out more details. He wore a dusty brown coat over a dark shirt, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the September sun. 2 revolvers sat at his hips, and a rifle rested in a scabbard on his saddle. But it was not the weapons that made the Harrison brothers nervous. It was something else, something in the way he moved, like a storm rolling in, slow but inevitable. "This is private business, stranger," Wade called out, trying to sound authoritative but not quite managing it. "Best you ride on through." The stranger reined in his horse about 30 feet from where the Harrison brothers had taken cover behind the water trough and the barn corner. He looked at them for a long moment, and even though Laura could not see his face clearly from her position, she saw the 3 men fidget under his gaze. "Seems to me like you are shooting at a lady's house," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard with perfect clarity. "Where I come from, that's not business. That's attempted murder." "You do not know what you are talking about," snapped Garrett Harrison, the younger of the brothers. "This woman owes us money, and we are here to collect." "That so?" The stranger's tone suggested he did not believe a word of it. "Well, I just rode through Concordia about an hour ago. Stopped by the land office, actually. Funny thing is, the clerk there told me the Vance Ranch is owned free and clear, no debts, no liens. So either you are confused about your finances, or you are a liar and a coward who shoots at women." Garrett raised his rifle, but Wade grabbed his arm, stopping him. Wade was the smarter of the 2, the one who planned their operations. He studied the stranger with narrowed eyes. "You got a name, mister?" "Jake Nash." Laura saw Wade's face go pale even from her position inside the house. She did not recognize the name, but clearly the Harrison brothers did. The 3rd man with them, a hired gun named Rollins, actually took a step backward. The Jake Nash? Wade's voice had lost all its bluster. Out of Colorado? Among other places. We heard you died in a shootout in Denver last year. Reports of my death have been exaggerated. There was no humor in Jake Nash's voice, just cold fact. Now, I am going to give you boys about 10 seconds to get on your horses and ride out of here. If you are still on this property when I count to 10, I am going to assume you mean this lady harm, and I will act accordingly. You cannot take all three of us, Garrett said, but his voice shook. Maybe not, but I will definitely get you first and your brother second. Rollins there might get a shot off, might even hit me, but he will still die knowing he did not do it for anything worth dying for. Your choice, gentlemen. 1. Wade Harrison was already backing toward his horse. He was a bully and a thief, but he was not stupid enough to face down a legend. Jake Nash's reputation had apparently spread even to this corner of Kansas, and whatever stories Wade had heard were enough to convince him that discretion was the better part of staying alive. This is not over, Wade said, trying to save face as he mounted up. That land is going to be ours. 2, Jake said calmly. All three men scrambled for their horses and rode out hard, dust kicking up behind them. Laura watched them disappear down the road toward town, hardly daring to believe they had actually left. Her hands were still shaking, adrenaline coursing through her veins like liquid lightning. Jake Nash sat on his horse for a moment longer, watching to make sure the men were truly gone. Then he turned toward the house, and Laura found herself looking at him properly for the first time. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed a trim and features that looked like they had been carved from weathered stone. A scar ran along his jawline, and his eyes, even shadowed by his hat brim, held a weariness that spoke of hard years and harder choices. But there was something steady in his gaze, something that made Laura feel, for the first time in weeks, that maybe she was not completely alone. She set down the rifle and stood up, brushing dust and glass from her dress. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk to the door and open it. Jake Nash had dismounted and was leading his horse toward the porch, moving with an economy of motion that suggested every movement was calculated, nothing wasted. "Thank you," Laura said, and was irritated to hear her voice crack slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Thank you for intervening. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." "Nothing good?" Jake stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at her. His eyes were gray, she saw now, the color of winter clouds. "You hurt?" "No. They were just trying to scare me, I think. Or maybe working up the courage to do worse." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very cold despite the warm afternoon. "I am Laura Vance. This is my ranch, or what is left of it." Jake Nash. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that felt old-fashioned and surprisingly courteous, given that he had just run off 3 men with nothing but his reputation and a countdown. "I apologize for riding in unannounced. I was passing through looking for work, and I saw the situation." "You were looking for ranch work?" Laura asked, and something in her chest loosened just a fraction. "Can you handle cattle?" "I can." "Can you mend fences, work with horses, manage land?" "Yes, madam." Laura looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. She knew nothing about this man except that he had just saved her life and that the Harrison brothers feared him. That should probably worry her more than it did, but she was desperate, and desperation made people take risks they would normally consider insane. "I cannot pay much," she said. "The Harrisons have been driving off my cattle and my help. I have maybe enough money to last through winter if I am careful, and that includes paying a ranch hand. But I need help, Mr. Nash. I need it badly. If you are willing to work for room, board, and $30 a month, the job is yours." Jake considered this for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, quick and decisive. "That seems fair. When do you want me to start?" "How about right now?" Laura tried for a smile and almost managed it. "I have a fence down in the north pasture, about 20 head of cattle scattered God knows where, and a barn door that has been hanging crooked for 2 weeks because I cannot fix it myself." "Then I best get to work." Jake looked at his horse, a rangy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes. "You have space in the barn for my horse?" "I do, and there is a bunkhouse out back. It is not much, but it is clean and dry. That is more than I have had some places." Jake led his horse toward the barn, and Laura followed, still not quite believing her sudden change in fortune. The barn was one of the older structures on the property, built by her father when he first claimed this land in 1867. That had been 19 years ago, back when Kansas was still rough territory, and Concordia was barely more than a few buildings clustered along the Republican River. Laura had been 4 years old then, too young to remember much, except the wagon ride and her mother's voice singing to keep her calm during the long journey from Missouri. "Your father build this place?" Jake asked as they entered the barn. The afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the boards, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. "He did. Started with just this barn and a tent for us to live in. Took him 5 years to build the house." Laura pointed to an empty stall. "You can put your horse there. There is feed in the bins, and the creek runs through the back of the property if he needs water." Jake unsaddled his horse with practiced efficiency, and Laura found herself studying him in the indirect way women learn to do when they did not want to be caught staring. He moved like someone who had spent years in the saddle, his hands sure and gentle with the animal. When he removed his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead, she saw that his dark hair was indeed too long, curling slightly at his collar. The scar on his jaw was old, a thin white line that suggested a knife rather than a bullet. "How long have the Harrisons been pressuring you?" Jake asked as he hung up his saddle. 3 months, give or take. Started right after my father died." Laura leaned against a support beam, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollowed out and shaky. "They made an offer to buy the ranch. I said no. Things escalated from there." "They hurt you before today?" "Not directly, but they have made it clear they will if I do not sell. They cut fences, stampeded cattle, ran off my workers. Last week someone took shots at me when I was riding the property line. Did not hit me, but I think that was intentional. They want me scared, not dead. A scared woman sells cheap." Jake's expression darkened. "Men like that?" He shook his head. "They are all over the West, taking what they want, hurting whoever gets in their way." "You sound like you have dealt with them before." "I have." He did not elaborate, and Laura decided not to push. A man's past was his own business, especially when that man had just saved your life. They walked back to the house together, and Laura found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and built lean and strong like someone who had spent years doing physical work. There was something quiet about him, a stillness that suggested he was comfortable with silence. Laura, who had been alone for months, found it oddly comforting. "I will fix you something to eat," she said as they reached the porch. "Then you can look at that fence if you are not too tired." "I am fine to work, but I would appreciate the meal. Been riding since dawn." Laura's kitchen was the heart of her house. A big room with a cast-iron stove, a sturdy table her father had made, and windows that looked out over the yard. She had always loved this room, loved the way the light came in during the morning and the smell of bread baking. But lately it had felt too empty, too quiet, a constant reminder that she was alone. Now, with Jake Nash sitting at her table, it felt almost normal again. She made coffee and fried up salt pork with beans, simple fare but filling. Jake ate methodically, not with the desperation of a starving man, but with the steady appreciation of someone who had gone hungry enough times to never take food for granted. "You said you were passing through," Laura said, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere in particular. I have been drifting for a while now, picking up work where I can find it." "And before that?" Jake looked at her over his coffee cup, and she saw a flicker of something in his gray eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. "Before that, I was a lot of things, none of them particularly admirable. The Harrison brothers seem to know your name." "Some people do." He took a drink of coffee. "I have a reputation, most of it earned, some of it exaggerated. I am not proud of all the things I have done, Miss Vance, but I have never hurt anyone who did not have it coming, and I have never raised a hand to a woman or a child. If that is not good enough for you, I will finish this meal and ride on. No hard feelings." Laura studied him, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to voice. She believed him. Maybe that made her foolish, but her instincts said Jake Nash was a hard man, but not a cruel one, and right now she needed hard more than she needed soft. "It is good enough," she said, "and you can call me Laura. Then you should call me Jake." They finished the meal in companionable quiet, and then Jake went to work on the fence. Laura watched from the porch as he gathered tools from the barn and headed out to the north pasture. He moved with purpose, and she found herself believing, for the first time in months, that maybe she could actually hold on to this ranch. Maybe she was not fighting a losing battle after all. The sun was setting by the time Jake returned, his shirt damp with sweat and his hands dirty from work. He had mended the fence and managed to round up half a dozen of the scattered cattle, driving them back to the near pasture where she could keep an eye on them. "The rest will take some tracking," he said, washing up at the pump in the yard. "But I will find them. Might take a few days. I cannot tell you what a relief it is to have help." Laura handed him a clean towel. "I have been trying to do everything myself, and it has been drowning me. You have been doing good considering. Most people would have folded by now." Jake dried his hands and face, then looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "But you do not have to do it alone anymore." Something in his words made Laura's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had been holding herself together through sheer stubbornness for so long that having someone acknowledge her struggle felt like a dam breaking. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see tears. "I will show you the bunkhouse," she said, keeping her voice level. "You must be exhausted." The bunkhouse was small but solid, with 2 beds, a stove for heat, and a window that looked east toward the sunrise. Laura had cleaned it out 2 weeks ago in a fit of optimism, hoping she might be able to hire new help. Now, Jake set his saddlebags on one of the beds and looked around with what seemed like approval. "This is fine," he said. "Better than fine. There are extra blankets in the chest, and I will bring breakfast over around dawn. You do not have to wait on me, Laura. I can cook for myself. I know, but I like cooking, and I have been making meals for one for too long. It will be nice to cook for 2 again." She hesitated in the doorway. "Jake, thank you, for today, for staying, for all of it. I know you do not know me, and you have no reason to put yourself at risk for my problems, but I am grateful." "You are welcome." Jake's expression softened slightly. "And for what it is worth, I think your father would be proud of how hard you have been fighting." The words hit Laura square in the chest, and she had to blink hard against the sudden burning in her eyes. "Good night, Jake. Good night." Laura walked back to the house through the purple twilight, and for the first time since her father died, she did not feel afraid of the coming night. She locked the doors and loaded the rifle, but it was more from habit than genuine fear. Somehow, knowing Jake Nash was in the bunkhouse made all the difference. She slept better that night than she had in months. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the September air carrying the first hint of the coming autumn. Laura was up before the sun, making biscuits and gravy, frying eggs, and brewing strong coffee. She found herself humming as she worked, a habit she had lost somewhere in the grief and fear of the past months. Jake appeared at the kitchen door just as the sun broke the horizon, his hat in his hands and his face freshly washed. "Morning. Morning. I hope you're hungry." "I'm always hungry." The corner of his mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile, and Laura realized it was the first time she had seen him show anything resembling humor. They ate together, and Laura found herself studying Jake in the clear morning light. He looked younger without the harsh afternoon sun shadowing his features, but there was still that weariness in his eyes, that sense of a man who had seen too much. She wondered what his story was, what had brought him to this particular road at this particular time. "I was thinking I would ride out and look for the rest of those cattle," Jake said, sopping up gravy with a biscuit. "If you have a map of your property lines, that would help." "I do." Laura fetched the map from her father's desk, spreading it out on the table. "We have about 800 acres, running from the creek here up to this ridge. Most of the cattle should be in this area, but some might have wandered onto the Harris property to the north." Jake studied the map, his finger tracing the boundaries. "The Harrisons. Any relation to the men yesterday?" "Cousins. The whole family has been trying to consolidate land in this area. They own about 3,000 acres already, but they want more. They want a cattle empire, and my ranch is sitting right in the middle of their plans. So they will be back." It was not a question, but Laura answered anyway. "Yes, they will be back. Then we had better be ready." Jake looked up from the map, his gray eyes serious. "I can handle the ranch work, but you need to learn to defend yourself properly. Can you shoot?" "My father taught me." "Good. But shooting targets and shooting at people who are shooting back are 2 different things. I will teach you what you need to know." Laura felt a chill run through her. "Do you really think it will come to that? I think men like the Harrisons do not give up easy. They have invested time and money into scaring you off, and they will not like that I am here now. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Jake folded the map carefully. But I am not going to let them hurt you. That is a promise. The quiet certainty in his voice made Laura believe him. She nodded, swallowing hard. Okay, then teach me. Jake spent the morning tracking cattle while Laura handled the chores around the ranch. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, tended the vegetable garden, and repaired a section of the corral fence. Physical work had always helped her think, and she needed to think now. Jake's arrival had changed everything, but she was not naive enough to believe it solved all her problems. The Harrisons would not give up just because one gunfighter had scared them off. They would regroup, bring more men, try different tactics. She needed to be ready. Jake returned around midday with another 8 head of cattle, driving them into the pasture with the ease of someone who had worked stock his entire life. Laura watched from the porch, admiring the way he handled the animals, patient but firm, knowing when to push and when to let them settle. Found these about 2 miles north, he said, dismounting. There are probably a dozen more scattered around, but I will get them tomorrow. You are good with cattle. Grew up on a ranch in Colorado. My father raised beef cattle, and I worked the herd from the time I could sit a horse. Jake unsaddled his buckskin, giving the horse a pat on the neck. That was a long time ago. What happened? Jake was quiet for a moment, and Laura thought he might not answer. Then he said, My father got in debt to the wrong people. They came to collect, and when he could not pay, they took the ranch. My father tried to fight them, and they killed him for it. I was 18. I tracked down the men who did it, and I made them pay. His voice was flat, emotionless. After that, I could not stay in Colorado. So I drifted. Took work where I could find it, sometimes on the right side of the law, sometimes not. Built a reputation as someone who was fast with a gun and not afraid to use it. It kept me alive, but it did not make me proud. Laura felt her heart ache for the young man he had been, barely more than a boy, watching his father die over land and money. I am sorry. That must have been horrible. It was a long time ago. Jake looked at her, and some of the hardness in his face softened. But I understand what you are going through. Watching someone try to take everything your family built, feeling helpless to stop it. That is why I stayed. I could not save my father's ranch, but maybe I can help you save yours. You barely know me. Does not matter. What matters is that you are in the right and they are in the wrong. That is enough. Laura did not know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They worked together through the afternoon, Jake fixing the crooked barn door while Laura organized the tack room, and it felt surprisingly natural, like they had been working together for years instead of just one day. That evening, Jake started teaching her how to shoot properly, not target practice, but real defensive shooting. How to draw quickly, how to aim under pressure, how to keep her hands steady when adrenaline was screaming through her veins. You were thinking too much, Jake said, after she missed the bottle he had set up for the 5th time. Stop trying to aim perfect and just look at the target. Your body knows what to do. My body thinks it should be hiding under the bed, Laura muttered, but she tried again. This time the bottle exploded in a satisfying spray of glass. There you go! Jake's rare smile appeared again. You are a natural. I had a good teacher. Laura lowered the gun, feeling a strange mix of pride and unease. She never thought she would need to learn how to shoot at another human being, but the world had changed, and she had to change with it or die. They practiced until the light failed, and then Laura made dinner while Jake tended to the horses. It was becoming a routine, she realized, a comfortable pattern that felt both foreign and familiar. Having someone else on the ranch, someone to share the work and the meals and the worries, eased a loneliness she had not fully acknowledged until it started to lift. Over dinner, Jake told her about some of the places he had been. Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. He had seen the wild country of the West, the good and the bad of it. And he told stories that made her laugh and others that made her heart hurt. He was careful, she noticed, to avoid the darker details of his past, the specific jobs he had taken and the men he had killed. But she could read between the lines, and she understood that Jake Nash had done hard things in hard times, and he carried the weight of it like stones in his pockets. Do you ever think about settling down? Laura asked as she poured more coffee. Finding a place to stay instead of drifting? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into his cup. Sometimes. But men like me do not settle easy. We carry too much baggage, and eventually it catches up to us. I would not want to bring that down on anyone else. You brought it here. That is different. You needed help, and I could provide it. When the trouble is over, I will move on." Laura felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at his words, which was ridiculous. She had known this man for exactly 1 day. But there was something about Jake Nash that called to her, something steady and true beneath the hard exterior. She found herself hoping he would not be in such a hurry to leave. 3 days passed in relative peace. Jake found the rest of the scattered cattle and mended all the broken fences. He repaired the barn door, fixed the pump that had been sticking, and even managed to patch a leak in the house roof that had been driving Laura crazy for weeks. She cooked and cleaned and handled the household side of the ranch, and together they fell into an easy partnership that felt both natural and right. Laura caught herself watching Jake more than she should, noticing the way he moved, the rare smiles he gave when he was pleased with his work, the careful gentleness he showed the animals. He was a hard man, shaped by violence and loss, but there was kindness in him too, buried deep but not dead. She liked him, she realized, more than liked him, if she was honest with herself. But she pushed those feelings down, not wanting to complicate an already complicated situation. On the 4th day, the Harrisons came back. Laura was in the garden when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and felt her stomach drop when she saw 6 riders coming up the road. Wade and Garrett Harrison were in the lead, but they had brought reinforcements this time. 4 men she did not recognize, all of them armed, all of them with the hard look of hired guns. Jake appeared from the barn, moving fast, but not running. He had his rifle in his hands, and his face was set in grim lines. "Get in the house," he said quietly as he passed Laura. "Load your rifle and stay away from the windows. There are 6 of them. I can count. Get inside." Laura wanted to argue, but the tone in Jake's voice told her this was not the time. She ran for the house, her heart pounding, and grabbed the rifle from above the mantel. Her hands shook as she loaded it, and she had to force herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Jake had trained her for this, but training and reality were vastly different things. Through the window, she watched the confrontation unfold. The 6 riders stopped about 50 feet from where Jake stood in the middle of the yard, his rifle held casually but ready. Wade Harrison dismounted, and 2 of the hired guns followed suit. The others stayed on their horses, hands near their weapons. "Well, well," Wade said, his voice carrying across the yard. "You are still here. I thought you might have moved on by now." "You thought wrong." Jake's voice was level, unbothered. "This is private property, and you are trespassing. Turn around and leave." "Or what? You will shoot all 6 of us?" Wade laughed, but it sounded forced. "Even you are not that good, Nash." "Maybe not, but I will get at least 3, probably 4. You want to bet on which 4? You want to bet you will not be one of them." One of the hired guns, a lean man with a scarred face, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "We are getting paid good money to run you off, Nash. Nothing personal, but business is business." "I understand business." Jake's eyes never left Wade Harrison. "Here is some business for you. This lady owns this land legal and proper. You have no claim to it, no right to be here. If you try to take it by force, you are thieves and murderers, and I will treat you as such. The law might not be much in these parts, but it exists, and eventually it will catch up to you. Is that what you want, to hang for some land that is not even yours?" "The law does not care about one woman and her failing ranch," Wade said. "And they certainly will not care about a drifter with a reputation for violence. We could kill you both and claim self-defense, and no one would question it." "They might if I testify," said a new voice, and everyone turned to see Sheriff Thomas Brennan riding up the road with 2 deputies. Relief flooded through Laura so powerfully her knees went weak. She had not sent for the sheriff, but someone must have, or maybe he had heard about the trouble and decided to investigate. Wade Harrison's face went red, then pale. "Sheriff, this is a private matter." "Looks like harassment to me," Brennan said, reining in his horse. He was a big man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude that had kept Concordia relatively peaceful for the past decade. 6 armed men on a woman's property without invitation. That is trespassing and intimidation at the least, attempted murder at the worst. "We have a legitimate business dispute with Miss Vance," Wade said, trying for reasonableness and failing. "We are simply here to discuss terms." "With 6 guns?" Brennan looked at Jake. "You must be the man I heard about, the one who ran these boys off a few days back." "Jake Nash. I work for Miss Vance." I know who you are, Mr. Nash. Your reputation precedes you. Brennan's tone was neutral, neither hostile nor friendly. I would prefer it if gunfights did not become a regular occurrence in my county. That would be my preference too, Sheriff, but I will defend this ranch and Miss Vance, whatever it takes. Brennan studied Jake for a moment, then turned to Wade Harrison. Here is how this is going to work. You and your men are going to mount up and leave. If I hear about you bothering Miss Vance again, I will arrest you for harassment. If I hear about any more cattle going missing or fences getting cut, I will assume it is you and act accordingly. Am I making myself clear? You cannot protect her forever, Wade said, but he was already backing toward his horse. Eventually, you will be somewhere else, and then we will settle this. Is that a threat? Brennan's hand moved to his gun. Because I am happy to arrest you right now if you are threatening a citizen of this county. Wade shut his mouth with an audible snap. He and his men mounted up and rode out, their departure lacking the bravado of their arrival. Laura watched them go, hardly daring to believe they had actually left without violence. Jake lowered his rifle and walked over to the sheriff. I appreciate your timing. I appreciate you not killing anyone in my county. Brennan looked past Jake to where Laura was emerging from the house. Miss Vance, I apologize for not coming sooner. I heard about the trouble, but I did not realize how serious it had gotten. It has been escalating, Laura said, joining them in the yard. The Harrisons want my land, and they will not take no for an answer. I know. They have been buying up property all over this area, sometimes through legal means, sometimes not. Brennan sighed. The problem is, unless I catch them in the act of doing something illegal, my hands are tied. Suspicion is not enough. They shot at this house 4 days ago, Jake said, with Miss Vance inside. Can you prove it was them? I saw them. Would a judge believe you, given your reputation? Brennan's expression was sympathetic, but realistic. I am not trying to be difficult, Mr. Nash, but the law requires evidence. Without witnesses besides you and Miss Vance, it is your word against theirs, and the Harrisons have money and influence. Laura felt frustration burn in her chest. So what am I supposed to do? Wait until they actually kill me? No, you are supposed to be careful, keep your guard up, and document everything. If they trespass, record it. If they damage property, photograph it if you can. Build a case that even their money cannot buy their way out of. Brennan looked between Laura and Jake. And having Mr. Nash here is probably the best protection you could ask for, legally speaking. The Harrisons know his reputation, and they will think twice before starting something they cannot finish. After the sheriff left, Laura and Jake stood in the yard, the morning sun warm on their shoulders. Laura felt shaky with leftover adrenaline, but also oddly triumphant. The Harrisons had come with 6 men, and they had been turned away. It was a small victory, but she would take it. I need to learn who sent for the sheriff, she said. I want to thank them. My guess would be someone in town who saw the Harrisons riding out this way with hired guns. Jake was checking his rifle, making sure it had not been damaged. You have more friends than you realize, Laura. People who do not like what the Harrisons are doing. I hope you are right. Laura looked at him. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer. You could have ridden away when you saw them coming. No one would have blamed you, but you stayed. I told you I would protect you. I keep my promises. Even when it means facing down 6 armed men? Especially then. Jake met her eyes, and something passed between them, a connection that made Laura's breath catch. I am not leaving, Laura, not until this is finished. She believed him. More than that, she trusted him, which was a far more dangerous thing. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability could destroy her if she was not careful. But looking at Jake Nash, at the steady strength in his gray eyes, she decided some risks were worth taking. The days settled back into a routine, but with an undercurrent of tension that never quite faded. Laura and Jake worked the ranch, always alert, always watching for the Harrisons to make their next move. Jake taught Laura more defensive tactics, and she practiced until she could draw and shoot without thinking, her body reacting on instinct. But there were softer moments too. Evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills while they talked about everything and nothing. Shared meals where the conversation flowed easy and the silences were comfortable. Laura found herself learning the small details of Jake's life, the things that made him human rather than just a reputation. His favorite food was apple pie. He had a scar on his left shoulder from a bullet he took in New Mexico. He liked rain and hated the hot desert winds that blew through Kansas in late summer. He had a younger sister somewhere back east, married and safe, and he sent her money when he could, but never visited because he did not want to bring his troubles to her door. Jake, in turn, learned about Laura, how she had loved growing up on this ranch, riding with her father, learning the land, how her mother had died when Laura was 16, carried off by pneumonia one brutal winter, how her father had taught her to be strong, to stand up for herself, to never let anyone make her feel small, how she dreamed of expanding the ranch someday, of maybe raising horses alongside the cattle, of building something that would last. "You will do it," Jake said one evening as they sat on the porch, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "You are strong enough to hold on to this place and make it thrive." "I hope so." Laura looked out at the land, the rolling hills and the distant creek, the grass moving like waves in the breeze. "This ranch is all I have left of my father. If I lose it, I lose him all over again." "You will not lose it." Jake's voice was firm, certain. "I promise you that." Laura turned to look at him, and, in the fading light, she saw something in his face that made her heart beat faster. He was looking at her with an intensity that went beyond professional concern, beyond simple friendship. There was something deeper there, something that both thrilled and terrified her. "Jake," she said quietly, not even sure what she was asking. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I know this is complicated. I know I am not the kind of man you should be trusting, let alone anything else. But Laura, being here with you, working this ranch, it feels right in a way nothing has felt right for years. I cannot promise you forever because I do not know what forever looks like for someone like me. But I can promise you now, and I can promise you that I care about what happens to you." Laura's breath caught in her throat. She should be cautious, should protect her heart, should remember that Jake was a drifter who had already said he would move on when the trouble was over. But her heart did not care about should. Her heart only knew that Jake Nash made her feel safe and seen and less alone than she had felt in years. "I care about what happens to you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "more than I probably should." Jake lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so gentle and old-fashioned it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Then let us see where this goes. No promises beyond today, no expectations beyond now. Just you and me, taking it one day at a time." "I can do that," Laura said, and she meant it. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her hands still tingling from Jake's kiss. She was falling for him. It was foolish and reckless, and probably doomed to end badly, but she could not seem to stop herself. Jake Nash had ridden into her life when she needed him most, and somewhere between his quiet competence and his rare smiles and his fierce protectiveness, she had lost her heart. The question was what she was going to do about it. The answer came 2 weeks later, when the Harrisons made their final move. Laura was in town buying supplies when she heard the commotion. People were running toward the telegraph office, shouting and gesturing. She abandoned her shopping and hurried over, fear already coiling in her gut. "What happened?" she asked Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress. "Fire," the older woman said, her face pale. "Someone just rode in from the North Road, said the Vance ranch is burning." Laura did not remember running to her wagon. She did not remember driving through town at a reckless speed that scattered chickens and made people jump out of the way. All she knew was the icy terror that gripped her heart and the single thought pounding through her brain. Jake. The smoke was visible from a mile away, black and thick against the blue September sky. Laura pushed the horses harder, her hands white-knuckled on the reins. Please, she thought, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. Please let him be okay. The barn was fully engulfed when she arrived, flames leaping 50 feet into the air. The bunkhouse was also on fire, though not as badly. But Jake was in the yard, very much alive, fighting to keep the flames from spreading to the main house. He had dragged the horses out and tied them safely away from the buildings, and now he was hauling buckets of water from the creek, his face black with soot and his shirt soaked with sweat. Laura leaped from the wagon and grabbed a bucket. Together they fought the fire, working in desperate silence as the barn collapsed in on itself with a roar of flame and sparks. The bunkhouse could not be saved, but they managed to keep the fire from spreading to the house and the other outbuildings. By the time the fire burned itself out, Laura was exhausted, filthy, and furious. She turned to Jake, who was leaning on his knees, coughing from smoke inhalation. "Are you hurt?" she demanded. "I am fine." His voice was hoarse. "They came about an hour after you left for town. 4 men, masked. They splashed kerosene on the buildings and lit them up before I could stop them. I got the horses out, but everything else is gone." Laura looked at the smoking ruins of the barn and felt something break inside her. That barn had been the first thing her father built on this land. It had sheltered their animals through countless winters and storms. And now it was ash. "I am done being nice," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I am done playing by the rules while they burn my life to the ground. I want the Harrisons to pay for this." Jake straightened, and she saw the same cold anger in his eyes. "They will. I promise you, they will." Sheriff Brennan arrived an hour later with his deputies, drawn by the smoke. He surveyed the damage, took statements, and looked grimly determined. "This is arson," he said flatly. "I can arrest the Harrisons on suspicion." "Do it," Laura said. "I want them to face justice." "They will claim they had nothing to do with it. The men who did this were masked." "Then make them prove where they were." Jake's voice was hard. "They are guilty, Sheriff. We all know it. It is just a matter of proving it in a way that sticks." Brennan nodded slowly. "I will do what I can. In the meantime, you two need to be extra careful. The Harrisons are getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things." After the sheriff left, Laura and Jake stood in the yard, surveying the ruins. The barn was completely destroyed, the bunkhouse a charred skeleton. They had managed to save the house and most of the outbuildings, but the damage was extensive. "Where will you sleep?" Laura asked. The bunkhouse was uninhabitable. "I can make do in the tack room." "No." Laura made a decision, knowing it was probably unwise, but not caring. "You will stay in the house. We have a spare room. It is just practical." Jake looked at her, reading the subtext beneath her words. "Laura, I do not want to be alone tonight," she said quietly. "I do not want to wonder if they are coming back, if they are going to burn the house next with me inside. I need you close." "Okay." Jake reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle despite the roughness of his palm. "I will stay." That night, Laura lay in bed and listened to the sounds of Jake moving around in the spare room down the hall. She felt safer knowing he was there, just a few steps away. But she also felt something else. Want. Need. A longing that went beyond simple attraction. She should stay in her room. She should be proper and careful and protect what was left of her reputation. But her barn was ashes and her life was under siege, and the man down the hall made her feel things she had never felt before. So Laura got up, wrapped a shawl around her nightgown, and walked down the hall to the spare room. Jake was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt off, examining a burn on his forearm. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and something flared in his eyes. "Laura, I do not want to be alone," she said again, "and I do not want you to be alone either." He stood up slowly, and she could see the war going on behind his eyes. Honor versus desire, propriety versus need. "If I cross that threshold, I am not going to be able to walk back. You understand that?" "I do." Laura stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I am not asking you to walk back." Jake crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. His kiss was desperate and gentle at the same time, tasting of smoke and coffee and something indefinably him. Laura melted into it, into him, letting go of fear and worry and just feeling. His hands were in her hair, hers were on his chest, and the world narrowed to this moment, this man, this connection that felt like coming home. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other in the darkness. Jake was tender in a way that surprised her, his touch reverent, like she was something precious that might break. Laura had not been with a man before, and he sensed it, going slow, making sure she was ready, whispering reassurances against her skin. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Jake tracing patterns on her shoulder, while Laura listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I know I should not. I know it is too soon. But I do." Jake was quiet for so long, she thought maybe he had not heard her. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her forehead. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to keep my distance, but Laura, You got under my skin from the first moment I saw you standing on that porch, ready to fight the world with nothing but a rifle and stubbornness. You are the bravest person I know. I do not feel brave. That is what makes you brave, being scared and doing it anyway. He pulled her closer. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if I am the man you deserve. But I know I want to try. I want to be the man who stands with you, who helps you build the life you dream about, who grows old on this ranch watching you thrive. Laura felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. Then stay, not just until the trouble is over, but after. Stay with me, Jake. Build this life with me. I will stay, he promised, for as long as you want me. Forever then. Forever. The next morning, Sheriff Brennan arrested Wade and Garrett Harrison on charges of arson and attempted murder. The evidence was circumstantial, but one of the hired guns had cracked under pressure and provided testimony in exchange for a lighter sentence. The brothers would stand trial, and Brennan was confident he could make the charges stick. Laura and Jake stood on the porch of the house and watched as the news spread through Concordia. People started coming by the ranch, offering help. Some brought lumber for rebuilding the barn. Others offered labor or supplies. The Vances had been part of this community for nearly 20 years, and folks did not forget that. Looks like you have more friends than you realized, Jake said, watching a wagon full of timber pull into the yard. We have friends, Laura corrected, taking his hand. This is your home now, too. Over the next 2 months, they rebuilt. The barn went up first, larger and sturdier than the original. The bunkhouse was reconstructed, though Jake never moved back into it, preferring to stay in the house with Laura. They worked from dawn to dusk, side by side with neighbors and friends, and slowly the ranch came back to life. The trial happened in late November, and both Harrison brothers were found guilty. Wade received 10 years in prison, Garrett 8. Their land holdings were seized to pay restitution to Laura and the other ranchers they had harmed. Justice, it turned out, could be served when the evidence was strong and the community was united. On Christmas Eve, Jake Nash and Laura Vance were married in the small church in Concordia. Laura wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Jake wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. Sheriff Brennan gave Laura away, and half the town attended the ceremony. I never thought I would have this, Jake whispered as they stood at the altar. A home, a wife, a future. You gave me that, Laura. You gave it to me first, she whispered back. You saved my ranch and asked nothing back. But I am giving you something anyway. My heart, my life, everything I am. Then I am the luckiest man alive. They honeymooned at the ranch, not wanting to leave during winter when the cattle needed tending. But it did not matter. They had each other, and that was enough. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Jake proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, developing a herd that was sought after across Kansas. Laura started raising horses like she had always dreamed, and within 5 years, they had a successful operation that made them comfortable, if not wealthy. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Laura's father, was born in the autumn of 1887. He had Jake's gray eyes and Laura's stubborn streak, and they loved him fiercely. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, bright and laughing, named Grace after Jake's mother. A third child, another boy, came 3 years after that, completing their family. Jake never fully lost his reputation, but he did not need to. The gunfighter from Colorado became a respected rancher, a devoted husband and father, a man who had found his place in the world. He still carried his guns, but they stayed in their holsters now, gathering dust in a peaceful life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Laura and Jake stood on the porch of their house, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres. The barns were full of healthy stock, and the future looked bright. "Do you ever regret it?" Laura asked, leaning into Jake's side. "Giving up the drifting life? Settling down? Getting old with me?" Jake wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Not for a single second. You gave me a life worth living, Laura. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," Laura said, and kissed him. As the sun set over the Kansas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Nash family stood together on the land they had fought for and built together. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, the frontier days fading into memory. But their love remained as fierce and true as it had been on that September day, when a cowboy rode onto a desperate woman's ranch and changed both their lives forever. They had faced down violence and loss, had rebuilt from ashes, had created something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of their separate pasts. And as they grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they never forgot the gift they had been given. Each other, a second chance, a love worth fighting for. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Thomas Nash grew up strong and capable, learning the ranch from both his parents. He had his father's quiet intensity and his mother's fierce determination. And by the time he was 20, he could run the entire operation himself. But he did not have to, because Jake and Laura were still active and involved, still working the land they loved, still very much partners in every sense of the word. Grace Nash was a spirited child who grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's green eyes and her father's steady heart. She loved the horses more than anything, and Laura taught her everything she knew about breeding and training them. By the time Grace was 18, she was handling sales and negotiations with buyers, charming them with her knowledge and confidence. The youngest, William, was born with a gentle soul that seemed at odds with his Wild West upbringing, but he found his place too, discovering a gift for healing animals that made him invaluable to the ranch and to neighboring operations. Folks came from miles around to have William Nash look at their sick livestock, and he never turned anyone away. Jake watched his children grow with a pride that sometimes overwhelmed him. He had given them what his own father had tried to give him, a legacy, a foundation, a place to build their lives. And unlike his father, Jake had lived to see his children thrive. "We did good," he told Laura one night as they sat on the porch, the familiar ritual of watching the sunset never growing old. "We did very good," Laura agreed, her hand finding his automatically, fingers interlacing in a pattern worn smooth by years of repetition. "Do you think Thomas will take over the ranch when we are ready to step back? I think all three of them will run it together, each using their strengths. Thomas with the cattle, Grace with the horses, William keeping everything healthy. They are a team, just like we were." "Just like we are," Laura corrected. "We are not done yet, Jake Nash." "No," he agreed, pulling her close. "We are not done yet." In 1896, when Jake was 44 and Laura was 41, they finally took a trip away from the ranch. Thomas was 29 and more than capable of managing things in their absence, and Jake wanted to show Laura the world beyond Kansas. They traveled by train to Colorado, where Jake showed her the mountains of his childhood and the grave where his father was buried. Then they went to San Francisco, where Laura saw the ocean for the first time and laughed like a girl at the waves crashing on the shore. "I never thought I would see so much water," she said, standing on the beach with the wind whipping her hair. "It makes our creek look rather small. Our creek keeps the cattle watered and the ranch running. That is all that matters." But Jake was smiling, pleased that he could give her this experience. They returned to Kansas after 3 weeks, and Laura admitted that while travel was wonderful, coming home was even better. The ranch was where they belonged, where their roots went deep into the soil, and their love had grown strong and true. More years passed, marked by small joys and occasional sorrows. Friends grew old and died. New neighbors arrived and became part of the community. The world changed around them, electricity and telephones, and automobiles creeping into even rural Kansas. But the fundamentals remained the same. The land, family, love. In 1902, Thomas married a schoolteacher from Concordia named Elizabeth, and they moved into the old bunkhouse that had been rebuilt and expanded into a proper small house. A year later, they gave Jake and Laura their first grandchild, a squalling baby girl named Laura after her grandmother. Jake held the tiny infant and felt his eyes burn with tears he was not ashamed to shed. "She looks like you," he told Laura, who was beaming with joy. "She looks like hope," Laura said, "like the future." Grace married in 1904, choosing a quiet horse breeder from Salina, who shared her passion for the animals. They settled on a neighboring property, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to have their own space. William, surprising everyone, became a veterinarian, studying by correspondence and apprenticing with doctors in larger towns. He remained unmarried but happy, devoted to his work and his family. Jake and Laura watched their family grow and expand, and they counted themselves blessed. The ranch that Laura had nearly lost, that Jake had helped her save, had become an empire of sorts. Not the ruthless kind the Harrisons had wanted, but something better. A place of community and family where everyone worked together and prospered together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together folks from all over the county. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and stories told about the early days when Jake Nash had ridden onto the ranch and changed everything. "I was not looking for a hero," Laura said when called upon to make a speech. "I was just trying to survive, but I got a hero anyway, and more than that, I got a partner. Jake taught me that strength is not about doing everything alone. It is about knowing when to accept help and how to give it in return. He saved my ranch, yes, but more importantly, he taught me how to save myself." Jake stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and added his own words. "Laura saved me from a life of drifting and violence. She gave me a reason to put down roots, to believe I could be more than my past. Every day I spend with her is a gift I never thought I would receive. So here is to 25 more years, and then 25 after that." The crowd cheered, and someone struck up a waltz on the fiddle. Jake led Laura onto the makeshift dance floor in the yard, and they moved together with the ease of long practice, their bodies knowing each other's rhythms without thought. "I love you," Laura whispered against his chest, "more now than the day we married, if that is possible." "It is possible," Jake whispered back, "because I feel the same." Time moved on, as it always does. The new century brought changes that would have been unimaginable when Jake first rode onto the ranch in 1886. Automobiles replaced horses for travel. Electricity came to Concordia and eventually to the ranch. The Wild West of their youth became the Old West, something talked about in stories and books, but no longer the daily reality. But through it all, Jake and Laura remained constant. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing but never stopping. They still worked the ranch, though their children and grandchildren did most of the heavy labor now. They still sat on the porch each evening, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still loved each other with a depth and intensity that made younger folks smile and shake their heads in wonder. In 1911, Jake fell ill with pneumonia. Laura nursed him through it with the fierce determination that had saved her ranch all those years ago, and he pulled through, weaker but alive. The scare made them both realize they were not immortal, that their time was finite and precious. "When I die," Jake said one night as they lay in bed, "I want to be buried on the ranch, under that big oak tree on the hill where I can watch over the land and you." "You are not dying any time soon," Laura said firmly. "But yes, the oak tree, and I will be beside you when my time comes." "Not for a long time yet." "Not for a long time," Laura agreed. Jake lived another 7 years, defying the doctors who said the pneumonia had weakened his lungs beyond repair. He was 76 when he finally passed in the spring of 1918, sitting on the porch with Laura, watching the sunset one last time. He simply closed his eyes and stopped breathing, his hand in hers, a small smile on his weathered face. Laura held him and wept, her heart breaking in a way she had not experienced since her father's death. But even through the grief, she felt gratitude. They had been given 33 years together, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and more happiness than most people dreamed of in a lifetime. Jake Nash had ridden into her life when she needed him most, and he had stayed, building a legacy of love and family that would endure for generations. They buried Jake under the oak tree on the hill, just as he had requested. The funeral drew people from across Kansas and beyond, all of them touched in some way by the quiet gunfighter who had become a beloved rancher and community pillar. The tombstone read simply, "Jake Nash, 1842-1918, beloved husband, father, and friend." Laura visited the grave every day, talking to Jake about the ranch, the family, the world that kept changing around her. She found comfort in the routine, in feeling close to him, even though he was gone. She lived another 4 years, staying active and involved in the ranch until the very end. Her children tried to convince her to slow down, to let them handle everything, but Laura was her father's daughter and Jake's wife. She would work until she could not anymore, and that was that. In the autumn of 1922, Laura Vance Nash passed away peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 73. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Jake, a letter clutched in her hand. It was a love letter Jake had written to her on their 10th anniversary, telling her everything she meant to him, promising to love her forever. She was buried beside Jake under the oak tree, their graves side by side, together even in death. The tombstone matched his, Laura Vance Nash, 1849-1922, beloved wife, mother, and fighter. The ranch continued to prosper under the management of Thomas, Grace, and William Nash. They ran it according to the principles their parents had taught them: hard work, fair dealing, community support, and love. The Nash Ranch became known throughout Kansas as one of the finest operations in the state, a testament to the couple who had built it from the ashes of near destruction. Years later, when Thomas's children asked him about his parents, about the legendary love story that founded their family legacy, he would take them to the oak tree on the hill. He would show them the graves side by side beneath the branches, and he would tell them the story. "Your grandmother was about to lose everything," he would say. "Her father had died, bad men were trying to steal her land, and she was alone and scared. Then one day, a cowboy rode onto the ranch. He ran off the bad men, he saved the land, and he asked for nothing in return. But your grandmother gave him something anyway. She gave him her heart, and he gave her his, and together they built all of this." He would gesture to the ranch spread out below the hill, the barns and houses, the cattle and horses, the land that rolled on for miles. They taught us that love is not just about feelings. It is about action, about standing together when things get hard, about building something that lasts. They faced down violence and loss and hardship, and they came through it together, stronger than ever. That is the legacy they left us. Not just land and buildings, but the understanding that real love, true partnership, can overcome anything. The children would listen, their eyes wide, and they would understand that they came from something special, that their family was built on a foundation of courage and love, sacrifice and partnership. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Kansas hills and the wind whispered through the grass, folks said you could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, a man and a woman, side by side, watching the sunset together the way they had for over 30 years. Just a trick of the light, the sensible people said. But those who believed in love, in legacies that transcended death, knew better. Jake and Laura Nash had found each other in the wild, desperate days of the Old West. They had fought for their ranch and for their future, and they had won. And their love, their story, would live on in the land they saved and the family they built, forever a testament to the truth that real love never truly dies. It just transforms, becoming part of the wind and the grass, the sunset and the stars, the very soul of the land it helped to preserve. And that was enough. That was everything.